Why does relationship satisfaction drop for both partners after having children?
What can we direct our masculine instincts toward that can make relationships and families thrive?
Why, even when dads are doing more than our fathers ever did, does it still feel like it's not enough?
I thought it was my right as a man to come home and stomp around and be the patriarch and be the leader.
What do we believe the job of a mum is? What do we believe the job of a dad is?
People are looking for a partner. They find kindness to be 10 times more attractive than the signaling of financial resources.
Can ideas around masculinity actually help me as a father, or are they things I should be fighting against?
Everything that we're doing is just trying to get to the core of what makes not just relationships tick, but families tick, and what makes them thrive. And it just keeps coming back to this emotional safety piece.
Where did these ideas come from? And what happens to our relationships when we try to live up to ideals that were never designed for the lives we're living now?
That's the change we have to make. Alex, we are at a moment when women don't need us anymore. They just don't.
In this podcast, I talk to authors, academics, sociologists, gender experts, and parenting experts to understand what's really happening to couples after they have children and find out if there is a way to be a happier parent. Matt Salis is a podcaster, a behavioral health researcher, and a writer who has worked in addiction and emotional abuse. And he's taken what he's learned from recovery and applied it to relationships, parenting, and family life. We talk about his concept of emotional masculinity, what masculinity can be now. We talk about his work as a coach, how the way he teaches children has had to change and how children have changed. But most of all, this is a conversation between two men, two dads, two husbands who've both made their own fair share of mistakes and are trying to work out ways in which they can be better. I hope you enjoy it. This idea of emotional masculinity. The reason it jumped out at me was because one of the big questions I ask at the top of the podcast is, as a father, do I need to push back and fight against masculinity, or are there elements of it that I can use? So just explain to me this concept of what emotional masculinity is.
Well, it came from a very similar thought process to what you're going through, Alex. I thought to myself, there are, ingrained instincts, whether they're genetic or conditioned, I'm not sure it matters, but this is stuff that's been passed down for thousands of years, this masculine instinct, and the idea that we're just going to flip a switch and no longer be masculine as men, I think that's unrealistic. But what can we do with those masculine instincts, the need to lead, to provide, to protect, and turn them in a direction? So make it an adjustment rather than abolishing it altogether. What can we direct our masculine instincts toward that is a better fit for the society that we live in, and can make relationships and families thrive? And so that was kind of a starting point for me. So let's take those three words: lead, provide, and protect. I believe emotional masculinity is all about providing an environment that's emotionally safe. Traditionally, the provide aspect was about money, right? Well, we live in a world now where women have gained educational superiority, financial independence, sexual autonomy, intellectual equality. They don't necessarily need, and they're not necessarily looking for a man to provide for them financially. But what can we do with that provide instinct? We can provide an environment that's emotionally safe, and that's not traditionally something that we men are particularly good at. We can protect our families emotionally within the household. We can protect them from critique and criticism and comparison, the kind of stuff that social media, it just lobs at them all day long and keeps them swirled in this world of comparison. We can provide an environment within the household that's free from that. And we can lead with emotional intimacy. I think it's really, really important for men, not just to create a safe environment where our partners and our families feel free to express themselves, but to lead some of those interactions and go to the emotionally intimate places that show that we understand how important communication is and how important it is to be vulnerable. And so if we can lead and provide and protect, that's kind of the top layer of emotional masculinity. And, the research that we've done, the conversations that we've had, the anecdotal stuff that we see shows this is really what is being looked for in modern partnerships.
There seems to be a theme throughout all of those of safety, right? The world is not a safe place because of men a lot of the time. So we need men. We need good men to make it a safe one. I don't feel, however extreme things at the moment, like we are a nation at war. And there's something that's shifted in masculinity where we haven't been at war for a long time in Europe, like a really long time if you look at the period before that. So it made sense that actually all that protecting stuff and that safety thing was around a kind of our physical strength. But how do we make a family safe in this different sort of peacetime environment?
For us to gain an understanding of what emotional safety means is really important. Let's look at that family dynamic. Here's some examples of ways I was raised and then things that I went ahead, it transferred to me, and this is the way I raised my kids early on. I thought it was fine to come home from a hard day of work and complain about whatever work situation was bothering me and do so kind of boisterously, and then turn on the TV news and yell at the TV screen about politics. And then when my favorite team was losing the big game, scream and yell at the TV. And then when my wife would walk in the room and tell me she took one of our kids to the orthodontist and they're going to need $5,000 worth of braces, I could blow a gasket about that too. Now, in every one of those situations, Alex, I'm not mad at my family. I'm not mad at my wife about the orthodontist. It's not her fault our kids' teeth are crooked. I mean, at least there's a 50% chance it's not her fault, right? One of us. But I'm not really mad at her, and I'm not mad at her about the bonehead politicians, and I'm not mad at her at all because my team lost the game or whatever happened at work. But I'm creating this environment basically by my presence in my house. I take the anxiety level from here and raise it up to here. And because just by yelling and being frustrated and letting my anxiety that I hold in all day, right? I go to work and I behave and I'm proper and I'm polite and I have good communication skills and I show that I am unflappable to the outside world. And then I come home and I do all my flapping. And I just raise the level of anxiety in the house. And the kids, what do? They go off to their rooms and they shut their doors and they do their thing. What we've got to do is create an environment within the house where the kids want to use the shared spaces, where the kids are sitting at the kitchen while we're making dinner, or they're sitting in the family room and we're doing something together after dinner. And they're not just feeling tension. We've got to lower that tension. And Alex, I didn't think that was important at all. I thought it was my right as a man to come home and stomp around and be the patriarch and be the leader. And I didn't realize until we started working with families and working with couples, relationships that were in distress. You mentioned my alcoholism and my recovery. The only thing that's pertinent about that from this conversation is it made me take a really hard, deep look at what wasn't working in my family. Without the alcoholism and my sobriety and having to battle through that, I never would have taken that hard look. I would be moderately happy and moderately unhappy and take that all the way to the grave. But because I had to dig deeper, I found some really interesting things. I found what my kids need and what my wife needs. And it's kind of the opposite of what I was providing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're making me think, have you seen F is for Family? It's a cartoon. It's a cartoon on Netflix, but basically that is the dad. That's this, and it's a caricature, isn't it? Of this kind of hardworking dad who's taking blows left, right, and center from the universe, and he just goes nuts all the time. And we've seen it with Homer, and we've seen it with Hank in King of the Hill, and they're these men, and they represent this kind of almost impotent rage like at the universe. And I love what you said there about taking responsibility for the emotional temperature of your home. And I think actually that's something that maybe both me and my wife were bad at. We both grew up as fighters, and we thought it was okay to stomp and scream when we were displeased at anything, not just with each other, but to really let it out. What was it that let you know that that wasn't okay? I know you did the work to look at yourself, but how did you come to the conclusion that this was damaging?
I figured out one time along the way, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that I was well into my recovery from alcoholism. I was trying to make things better and really struggling. And I finally figured out that while my wife loved me and she was committed to keeping the relationship together, I was sober. We were on a good path. I was a pretty good father. I figured out that while she loved me, she didn't like me anymore. And that was a really hard blow. I had always, if you put a hierarchy out there, I always thought love was more important than like. And it was the first time that I realized if you're partnered with someone and you're going to spend years and decades with them, it's pretty darn important that they like you. And so I started looking at what are the things you don't like? And it was the ways in which I raised the temperature in the house, the ways I disciplined the kids.
Was this a direct question? What do you not like about me?
It eventually became one. I mean, she didn't come right out and say, I don't like you. I said, oh my gosh, I'm figuring out you don't really like me very much. And it was kind of an epiphany for her too. It wasn't like she sat down and thought that through. And we came to the realization that the person I was not like when I walked in the room. My wife's name is Sherry. Sherry, when I walk in the room, does that excite you or does that depress you? And she said, it makes me anxious. I don't know if you're going to criticize me for something. I don't know if you're going to second guess a decision that I've made. I don't know if you're going to tell me that my political opinion on whatever topic is wrong and I need to look at it your way. I just don't know what I'm going to get from you. And so my antenna goes up. I get anxious around you. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? This is the person I love most in the world. We're supposed to have the most comfortable relationship we could possibly imagine with each other. And instead of making you anxious, what a shame. What a shameful way to go through life. And so that was kind of the tip of the iceberg. And then I started looking at the kids too. And I said, let me back up and say this, Alex. When I use the word masculinity, I think the natural corollary to that, the natural opposite that people think of is femininity. I don't think of it as masculinity and femininity. What I see in not only my wife, but all the women that we work with, is a really strong nurturing component. So whereas my component for masculinity might be strong, nurturing, I know that's a part of femininity, but it's only one aspect. But I think that is the most important one to consider when considering relationship dynamics and finding a fit that works and finding a relationship that can thrive. Does my masculinity complement or make harder the nurturing component? So back to where I was going with parenting. When I'm second guessing my kids, when I'm snipping at them, when I'm teasing them, I don't know about you, Alex, but I grew up in a household where the girls were princessified and the boys were teased. And then I carried that out there. I went out into school and I was constantly taking jabs at people because it was like, throw a punch or receive a punch. Those are your two options. So you better be on the front foot when it comes to teasing. And then I raised my kids that way. And so any weakness they would show, I'd jump on it and make a joke. If their grades weren't good enough, if they didn't do well in their sport endeavors, whatever, I was there to offer a critique. And the last thing they needed from me was a critique. And I'll tell you this, the last thing my wife needed to see was me critiquing my kids, because as a natural nurturer, her instinct is to protect them. And when I'm the one that's taking the shots at them, I become her enemy. And that's a really difficult dynamic to get through in a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting that that teasing thing. All my kind of very, very, very close friendships have had that as the sort of standard method, male to male method of communication. And it's this kind of fun bravado-y thing, but there's always been this huge amount of love underneath it. What's interesting is when you take that away. I did a podcast the other week with someone, really, really lovely bloke, and he sort of sat for the last 5 minutes and looked me in the eye. We did it in person, and told me how much my work had helped him and said nice things to me. And it was so deeply uncomfortable
Yeah, I
to
was
look
hoping you were
another
going to
man
say
in
that.
the eye
Yes.
and have him say nice words. I was like, okay, can we cut? Like, it was so, why is that so hard?
I mean, that's the problem.
Why do you think
just
that
hit the nail
is?
on the head. It's the conditioning. It's the conditioning that we go through, and it transfers to being the center point of what makes relationships with women so difficult. You know, the big joke is that, you know, women want to talk your ear off and men don't want to communicate. We don't want to communicate because we don't know how. The only thing we know how to do is tease. And I get your point is well taken when you say there's love underneath that. I've had a lot of male friends that I feel deeply connected to, and I would lay down my life for, right? But our relationship consists of poking at each other and teasing at each other, and there's no real emotional depth. And I think that's the change we have to make. Alex, we are at a moment when women don't need us anymore. They just don't. And so we have to find a way for them to want us. This goes back to my comment about my wife loved me, but she didn't like me. You used to be able to get through a whole, 70-year marriage like that, and everything was fine. It's not fine anymore. The divorce statistics show it. 70% of divorces are initiated by women. It has nothing to do with finances. It has everything to do with a lack of emotional connection.
They don't need us anymore. They do not need us anymore. We've got to find a way to make them want us. And we've got to offer something different, something more than a paycheck.
We have to do things that are desirable. And it comes down, I'm convinced it comes down to this emotional safety piece, relationship after relationship that we work with. The key driver for dissatisfaction on the woman's side is she just doesn't feel safe emotionally in her relationship. She doesn't know what she's going to get. She doesn't know when he's going to fly off the handle. She doesn't know what's going to make him upset. She doesn't know what mood he's going to be in from moment to moment. And so this is a skill we have to learn. I firmly believe, Alex, that we have to meet the moment, right? I talked about all that change that's taken place for women. You know, when I was born, the year I was born, actually, kind of interesting, my eventual mother-in-law had been recently divorced, and she had to get her father to co-sign on a checking account because women couldn't be trusted to have their own money in the bank without a man's signature on the account, right? When I was in college, it was still legal in the United States, and very embarrassing fact, in some states, it was legal for a man to rape his own wife. All of that is behind us, and thank God it is. The degree to which women have prospered in the 50 years I've been on this planet is amazing. But now we've got work to do. We have to meet the moment. We have to level up, if you will. And so I look at all where is it we can level up? And it's on this emotional side. We have to be able to communicate without teasing and create this safe environment for communication that's unlike anything we've ever had to do before. This really is uncharted territory for us men.
Yeah, I do want to just jump in on what you said earlier about the not knowing what you're gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely been like that with my wife, but I think even more shamefully, I think I've been like that with my kids,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, I could be really really loose, you know, really permissive. Everyone's jumping up and down on the tables and having a pillow fight, and it's totally brilliant on a Sunday. And then on a Monday, if I'm busy or I'm stressed for work or hungover, actually, like suddenly, like, what the hell do you think you're doing? Do you know what I mean? And then and this kind of not knowing what they're gonna get, that safety element was not there when I was a young dad, but I could be enormously loving, and I could be soft, and then every so often I wasn't, and I'm feeling deep shame saying this, because I can actually remember my daughter's face once when I snapped at her, and it's shock. It's not this man who snaps all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, where's that dad come from? And
Yeah.
that's very, very dangerous, isn't it? Because then you get kids, as you say, who hide from you. They don't want to be in those shared communal spaces. And I think this is very hard for me to take on, because, we used to have this thing where my wife would, this is from my perspective, shout at the kids, stop that, Red, stop what you're doing. I'd finally get sick of it, and I'd be like, oi, everyone stop it. And she'd be like, don't shout. And I'd be like, are you kidding? But it was just, people weren't scared when she did it, and they were when I did it.
Yeah.
And there is this different responsibility for a man.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you talk about the deep shame, I'm a label wearer. I don't know why that is, Alex, but when I think about words that have been stigmatized, I would rather adopt that word, wear that label, and then work on the stigma than choose a different word. So I have gotten comfortable over the last few years recognizing that my past behavior was emotionally abusive. I will call myself an emotional abuser. For some men, that's just a bridge too far. That's tough to wear that label, because abuse is connected with physical abuse, and that's the red line that we don't cross, isn't it? But we're very comfortable crossing the line of emotional abuse because we haven't drawn that red line yet. We haven't, as a society, said that's not okay. A lot of men prefer the term reactive. I'm reactive. That's what you were describing, where it's fine, and then blow up, right? One of the benefits, the silver lining, I'm not going to go so far as to say benefits, but the silver lining to having gone through alcoholism and recovery is my reactivity, my swing from exactly what you're describing, pillow fight on the table and we're all having fun, to, okay, that's it, it's over. I could snap like that when I was in active addiction and go from fun time to everyone quiet down. It's Sunday night, we got to get ready for tomorrow, and the party is over. And I would do that in such a way that it would just leave the kids' head spinning. Like, we were just laughing 2 seconds ago, and now we're being yelled at to go brush our teeth. Like, what the hell is going on? And so, yeah, I recognize that my past behavior, I recognize it now as emotional abuse. Call it that, call it reactivity, whatever it is. It creates this lack of emotional safety. And then it just becomes a generational thing that gets passed on, right? I mean, I learned it from my father. I don't want my kids to learn that and transfer that to their families. I want something different from them. Unfortunately, I didn't come to this epiphany until my kids were in their teens. And so I've got a lot of work to do to convince them. I can show them now, but I can't show them from birth. And I wish I could go back. If I had one thing I could change, if I could go back, that would be it.
Yeah, I get that. That's why we need to get the other guys younger when they're younger dads, because I'm the same. I'm like, my youngest one, okay, but my other two have known two really different dads.
Yeah.
And they remember. We talk about it, but they remember when I was more like that. I'm interested in, you've said a few times when we work with, what's the research that you've done around this stuff, and when you're talking about working with people, tell me what your actual work looks like, and then I can start to get a better picture of how we achieve these things, how we achieve this emotional safety.
Sure. So I'm a writer and a podcaster. Back in 2019, I think, is when we started leading peer support groups. And I also enrolled in grad school. I got a master's degree in sexual health, all because I was interested in the relationship component when people were coming out of addiction. And so that's where the majority of my writing is around intimate partnerships in recovery. But it turns out that translates to relationships that aren't in recovery and just don't realize they need the work. So it's very transferable. But anyway, peer support groups for people that are trying to recover from alcoholism. But what really took off for us, we started with my wife and I together, we started peer support groups for the partners of the alcoholics. And that was a void that really needed to be filled. And so that has kind of exploded for us. And that's where we've learned so much about these relationship dynamics that then we say, we just heard 10 women in a row tell the same story. And I would turn to my wife and say, is that how you feel, Sherry? And she would say, yeah, I just needed someone to put it into words for me. And so, from that, I've done research projects through the University of Minnesota that we found that within relationships, there are 40% higher reports of sexual satisfaction when emotional intimacy takes place first. So that connection between emotional intimacy and physical intimacy is clear. It's well correlated. It's really important. We've also done surveys that have reported that people, when they are not yet in relationship, but they are looking for a partner, they find kindness to be 10 times more attractive than the signaling of financial resources. That was research that I did directly based on some of what I heard from Scott Galloway, who's kind of one of the leaders in this realm of the problems with boys and men. And one of the things that he says is that women are still looking for financial signaling from men. And I said, gosh, that's just not what my anecdotal evidence suggests. So I did a little research project around that and found that, in fact, it's not what women are looking for. Women or men are looking for kindness, a signaling of emotional safety 10 times more frequently than they're looking for financial resources. Everything that we're doing is just trying to get to the core of what makes not just relationships tick, but families tick and what makes them thrive. And it just keeps coming back to this emotional safety piece.
Let's delve in on Galloway just for a sec, because I
Okay.
think that's really interesting. Because I referenced him the other day, and I got quite a few of my followers got in touch to say, can you please be more critical of him? And because basically he's a misogynist, and I don't believe that's the case, but also I have a real problem with this idea of labeling everyone's ideas as bad because you don't like some of them. Like, I think if we did that, we wouldn't listen to Aristotle or any of the kind of classical philosophers, actually, because they say some crazy, crazy stuff. And I think what Scott Galloway is trying to do is help men. I think you're right. He does seem to come back to this very narrow view that what men can offer is a paycheck. And the problem with that is, as you've said, that's not what women need. So I feel like his medicine is actually the disease that got men stuck in the first place, and he's kind of doubling down on the disease. But also, he is very open about being a workaholic, the fact that it cost him his first relationship, the fact that it cost him his health. He does say all those things as context,
I think it's hard for him not to focus on the areas where he has expertise, though, right? I mean, he's had failed businesses, but he's also had wild business success. His self-esteem, in my opinion, I'm just guessing here, right? But his self-esteem seems to come from his net worth, from his financial success. And I think that's a traditional viewpoint for men. And so his solutions, I think I share a lot of the same diagnosis of what the problem is. I just think I diverge with him when it comes to what the solutions are. When I hear him interview Richard Reeves and Jonathan Haidt, they talk a lot about occupational changes that need to happen, educational changes, financial reform, kind of the traditional things. And some of their ideas are spot on, in my opinion, Alex. Like here in the States, I don't know what it's like on your continent, but here in the States, we have just absolutely vilified the trades over the last 30 or 40 years. You have to go get a 4-year college education, and that's the way to go. And if you're not doing that, then you're a financial failure and an occupational failure. We have to change that back. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made. Not that money is my driver, but there's a lot of money to be made in the trades. And it's also, to a greater extent, AI proof than a lot of the more, thought of as higher esteem occupations that AI is going to blow out of the water. So some of what they're saying makes sense. But like, let me give you an example. Richard Reeves, who is the founder of the American Institute of Boys and Men, he does a lot of good work in this area. He talks a lot about how his son is an elementary school teacher and how the percentage of elementary school teachers that are male is way lower than it used to be. And that is an area that we need to improve. Along with that, all three of them talk about how we need men to be coaching sports again and after school programs and just being involved in boys' lives. And I think they're partially right. But the pushback that I give, Alex, is if we're going to teach the same traditional role of tease or be teased, if you have some wound, get up and rub some dirt on it. If men are going to continue to behave the way men have always behaved, I'm not sure we need more men involved in kids' lives early. I mean, obviously, I do think that that's what we need, but we need men who have a different perspective. I coach high school and college soccer, and I can't tell you how dramatically that has changed for me in the last 10 years. In response to what I've seen, it's not all me driven. I mean, the kids have changed too. The kids have changed a lot, but I've also taken a different tact for the way I approach them, because I have a better understanding of what I think they need. And so I think some of the solutions that you hear from that kind of triad of solutions to boys and men, I think some of the solutions are important, but I think they're missing this emotional piece. And the reason I think they're missing it, Galloway specifically, is I don't think anyone's ever taught it to him. I don't think he's ever embraced it. And so it's hard to preach something you don't know.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I've not read his book. That very much comes across in the interview with him that I heard, where he talks about the kind of father he's had. He just doesn't really have that language. He can't feel the benefit of it. Just tell me more about that. How has teaching kids football, English football or soccer, how has that changed in the last 10 years? How have you changed? How have they changed? What's different?
Well, to go all the way back, I've been coaching for 30 years. And when I first started coaching, I mean, I was a fire and brimstone, yeller and screamer, my way or the highway. Any infraction is going to result in running. I was what I saw on TV. I was what I thought it took to be successful. I was also incredibly insecure. So the win-loss record at the end of the season was the only driver of my self-esteem as it relates to coaching. I could say the right things, right? If somebody asked me, why do you coach? Oh, I'm trying to, help boys turn into men and girls turn into women. I'm trying to create leaders. I'm trying to help them mature. I could say that, but really, if I wasn't successful win-loss wise, I felt like a failure. And so everything I did was focused on that. And what I've learned over the years is you can't focus on winning and then win. You've got to focus on the way you treat your players and the environment that you nurture. And if you do it right, it'll probably result in winning. And so I've had to do like a 180 from the fire and brimstone, screaming and yelling kind of coaching. The way the kids have changed, something happened as a result of COVID. And I think there is a big piece of it that is COVID itself. If you think about it, COVID was a blip on the radar for you and I, right? At my age, in my 50s, a couple of years or 6 months or 18 months of lockdown, whatever it was, whatever part of my life was disrupted was a fraction of my life. If you're 13 years old and you go on lockdown for 18 months, that's a huge chunk of your life. Your whole, conscious existence has been altered dramatically. And so these kids came out of what we did with them during COVID with just a whole different perspective. They were much more comfortable in isolation. I'm not going to say happy. They weren't happy in isolation, but if you could put them in the corner with an electronic device, that was the comfort zone, and breaking free from that has been a real challenge. So between COVID and the social media piece, which I think we will all acknowledge has had a huge impact on our kids, and the result, Alex, is a complete lack of resilience. So if you've got a fire and brimstone coach over here yelling and screaming and kids with absolutely no resilience, that is a recipe for disaster. So some of my coaching change took place because I started to recognize what success looks like, and it looks different to me than wins and losses. And some of it was necessitated by, working with kids with no resilience. And it turned into, I am so much more positive in my feedback now than I used to be. It used to be, when I was coached as a kid, if I was told something negative that I was doing, I'd work hard to fix that thing. Now, when kids are told something negative, it shuts them down like it's over. And so I have to accentuate the positives. And maybe I can use an example over here. Hey, let's look at what Megan is doing. Let's look at her first touch and how hard she's worked on that and what that's doing for the betterment of the team. Can we all work on that rather than telling someone that their first touch isn't very good and they need to work on it?
Okay, I'd like to sort of push back on some of that and play around with it a little bit. There was something, and all of this ties together, something in what you said there about the kind of the end of that kind of I think the example you gave was the rub dirt on the wound and get back at it. That is part of masculinity, right? A sort of toughness, a resilience, I'm going to pretend that doesn't hurt so I can be functional and get on with it. And I think we don't need to get rid of that. What we need is the ability to not do that. And previously, men have just been very one note, because when you do that enough, when you get back on the bike straight away every time and you keep pedaling, you lose the ability to acknowledge that falling off the bike hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we calcify, and that's when we have real trouble accessing the emotional side. I think the danger is that we shouldn't be turning down those like getting rid of those traditional masculine things. They're things I teach to my daughter. They're part of resilience. And I think it's a bad idea to get rid of them. It's like, one of the skills that I really try and teach my kids is like, go and do scary stuff. Go and do stuff that you think is probably going to go a bit wrong. And then when it goes wrong, realize that you don't die and that you're fine and that you can do it again. It's a really important power. And I think one of the things that happened over COVID was that as a society, we changed our relationship with safety to be, now it's your responsibility to make me feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
That is what lockdown said.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, no one else can really make you feel safe. Feeling safe is something that's in us. And it's often we feel safe when we're someone who's fallen off the bike a lot of times. Like when we've been roughed up a bit by the world and we're like, I'm still standing. That's one of the ways we grow a sense of safety.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I agree with a lot of that. I believe that there is enough out there in the world that is going to come at us and pose challenges for us to overcome, that the outside world is the place where we learn that. And I agree. I tell my kids the same thing. Go out and do something hard and learn from failure. It's important that we learn from failure. But when you come back, I'm going to create an environment where you can process what happened to you and not just tell you, oh, well, go try again if it didn't work. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. Keep beating your head against the pipe until you break it. And I think that was the traditional kind of fathering that I got. And so I think the dynamic is, what's the home life look like versus what is the outside world? I was raised to believe that as a parent, I've got to teach my kids resilience. I don't believe that anymore. I think there's plenty out there in the big bad world that's going to teach them to be resilient and that's going to show them opportunities for failure. I've got to be the safe landing zone for when they come back home, and I got to give them a place to express what they've been through. And I think that's important not only as a father, but also as a coach. That's the way I view my role in coaching as well. I talk a lot as a component of emotional masculinity. I talk about resilience, and I say we need to grow some emotional grit. And I think that starts in childhood. It certainly is important in adult relationships, romantic partnerships. Emotional grit is huge. It's how we come about it. I think there has to be that combination of safe landing zone and going out there and doing things that are hard.
Yeah, there's something there, isn't there, about also I can tell my kids, look, it's really good to do those things. But then the other thing that I have to demonstrate is, how are you, Dad? Do you know what? I'm sad.
That's right.
I'm sad today. This has happened. This hasn't gone my way, and I'm feeling frustrated. But really, I'm like, oh, this is direct quote from 2 days ago. I feel like I'm pulling all these different levers, and nothing's happening. And I know I'm going to be fine. But just at the minute, actually, I'm wiped by the whole thing, and I feel down about it. And that's okay. Dad can be like that, right? And that means they can be like that, like.
Yeah, and Alex, contrast that with saying, I'm mad. That's how I am, because this fucking idiot at work didn't do his job, so I had to do his job for him. And so now I'm doing two people's job, and I'm not getting paid for that. And this is a bunch of crap. And, I hate the situation I'm in. How different is what you said versus what I said?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the same situation, and yours is a cover-up emotion for what mine was actually going on, right?
Well, isn't that what's at the core of it? Men, we are conditioned, we're raised to express anger and joy, and that's a kind of about it, and little tangents of anger and joy. We don't have the emotional bandwidth to communicate in other ways, and that's the piece we need to learn. It's so interesting. When I work with men that are in recovery from alcoholism, they feel all these feelings for the first time because they aren't using their medicine, their maladaptive coping mechanism, right, to medicate those feelings away. And they don't know what they are. And so finding labels for what these emotions are and then finding a way to express them, it's an epiphany for them. It's like, it's like opening a whole new toolkit, and you used to just have a screwdriver and a hammer, and now you got the full array, and it's amazing what you can do with it.
So tell me what it looks like when men embrace this idea of emotional masculinity, which is basically, tell me if I've got this wrong, but it's about bravery, right? It's about doing something scary, getting in touch with things that you found other ways of covering up. That might be through alcohol, or that might just be through a blanket emotion of rage that you're allowed to feel. So doing something brave, getting in touch with these things, making it your responsibility to lead your family in a new direction, of having these different conversations, and being a leader through example, right, of these things. Am I getting that right?
You are. It's definitely about bravery and resilience. I like what you said just a second ago about the accountability piece. I think it's important for us to understand that even when something's not our fault, it's still our responsibility to correct, to enhance, to engage, to make it better. I got that from Laura McCowan, who's an author that I'm very fond of in the addiction recovery community. She, specifically talking about addiction, says it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And I like to expand that into all realms of life. We all have to deal with stuff that was not of our creation, but somebody's got to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I use that a lot for gender equality and the inequality in the home. It's like, you didn't create these roles, you didn't create this unfairness, but it's your responsibility to sort it out. It's not your fault. No one chose this. You didn't individually choose it, but it's your responsibility now to sort this out. I love that. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, absolutely. And so what it looks like when we see it in practice, a lot of what I like to work with people on is a writing kind of program where I give a prompt and then the people in the group write to the prompt. Because when we write, a couple of things happen. we are more expressive, we're more vulnerable, we're more comfortable saying things that just off the cuff don't come to mind or don't feel comfortable coming out of our mouths. And so when we can put that intermediate step between thought and verbalization, the writing piece, we can put that intermediate step, it gets deeper, it gets more vulnerable, it gets more expressive. And then when we share that in a safe environment where the feedback is receptive and not teasing and not cutting down and critique, then that gives the person kind of a foundation for a comfort with vulnerability. And then they can have that conversation with their children, like what you just described, where you're saying, listen, how am I? Well, I'm not just going to tell you I'm fine, or I'm not going to tell you I'm angry. I'm going to tell you really how I am. Here is the emotion I'm feeling. Here's the input that made me feel this way. Here's how I'm going to handle it. And here are the core things that I've got in the back of my mind that help me know I'm going to be okay. And this writing process is very, very powerful. And if you think about it, if we take a second to write our emotions as opposed to just, word vomit, whatever comes to mind, we're probably going to express that in a way that can be received within our family as an emotionally safe expression. It's not toxic. It's not up here. It's down here. It's more reasonable. And so, what happens is emotional regulation within the family, the nervous system stuff. We come out of fight, flight, fawn, and freeze mode. Our families do. And that communication, that vulnerable communication can thrive, and it just builds. I start opening up. All of a sudden, the kids' bedroom doors are open. They're in the living room instead of in their bedrooms, and we're having real conversations, and they feel comfortable expressing their fears and anxieties in ways that previously they were afraid they were going to get chopped down for saying. Just last night, I was running a group, and it was with people that were years in recovery. So alcohol was no longer the problem. They had a growth mindset. They're trying to be the best version of themselves. Very much what I think your audience is looking to do, to grow and to develop and become the best possible versions of themselves. One of the gentlemen in the group, the prompt was, this thing happened and I can't ignore it. And it's a part of me now, and that's okay. The idea is we have to accept our baggage. We have to accept our histories as part of us and still be okay enough to move on and grow from there. Well, this gentleman wrote about his 16-year-old daughter coming to him and asking if she could get a tattoo. And he said, my traditional reaction would be to blow a gasket and say, not till you're 18 and not under my roof, and there's no tattooing happening here. But instead, he asked her questions. He asked her what she wanted, where on her body she wanted to get it, how comfortable she might be meeting him halfway and waiting until she was 17. And so instead of his draconian approach of you have to be an independent adult at 18, maybe we can meet in the middle. And he said it turned into this lovely conversation that actually lasted the whole weekend. They kept coming back to it and interacting. And she felt like her father was a safe place. And he connected with his daughter in a way he'd never done before. And the whole group, mostly men and a few women, we've all got tears streaming down our cheeks by the end of this story. And so creating an environment where vulnerability is rewarded is really, really, really beneficial. And it's something that doesn't exist largely in our culture. And I think this is an adjustment we have to make.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think for a lot of my childhood, there were a lot of things in my house that were banned. And what that actually meant was the conversations about them were banned. I still did all the stuff.
Yeah.
I just did it all in secret. And I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Whereas you don't want to ban conversations with your kids. Like, it's just a bad move. There's no power there. I think the Gottmans use an analogy of a rock. It's like, if you're going to be a rock in a relationship and be completely immovable, what happens? Everyone walks around the fucking thing.
That's right.
Just ignore it. Do you know what I mean? There's no actual power in being immovable.
Well, one of the things I learned in my master's work in sexual health that I found so fascinating, I can't quote the statistics exactly anymore. I don't remember them. But, in the States, the sexual education curriculum has forever been abstinence only until marriage. It's all about preventing premarital sex and preventing sexually transmitted diseases and preventing teen pregnancies. Nothing creates more teen pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases than telling kids that they can't have sex rather than talking to them about what sex is all about. So it's actually completely backfired here in the States, you know, and it overlays so well with my adolescence. You're exactly right. Oh, you can't drink till you're 21? Oh yeah, I'll show you. You know, you can't have sex till you're married?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I bet I can. You know, it's crazy the degree to which we think telling
yeah.
people no is the solution.
I see, but also I see parents repeat that pattern again and again. Like my
It's
best
all we know.
mates, I'm like, no, I'm coming down hard on this one. I'm like, but mate, why do you think that's going to work? Like when it didn't work on us, and like it's crazy.
It's because we don't have other
'Cause
tools.
it's all we know.
Because, we don't understand vulnerability and emotional safety. No one's ever taught us. We don't, you know, there's no better way to get what we want, to get the outcome that we're pursuing than releasing control. I mean, that had to happen within my relationship and within my family. The tighter my grip, the less likely I'm going to get the outcome I want. One of the filters I try to run things through now, Alex, is what are the stakes here? Right? So if my kids bring something to me and it's outlandish and it's foolish and it's going to take them down the wrong path and it doesn't make any sense, and I know it because I've got more tread off my tires than they do. I've been around a lot longer and I know I'm right. But then I run it through the stakes filter. Okay, they want to go do this thing. Is it going to cause them physical harm? Is it going to cause them serious emotional harm? If the answer is no, let them do it. You know, let them learn on their own, because me telling them no is just going to make them want to do it more. And so running it through that filter of what are the stakes is really important.
There's another guy that I did an interview with, who has an amazing podcast in Australia called Space Makers. And we were talking about this terrifying moment of letting your teenager get on the bus on her own, unsupervised. And what do we do to fight against all the anxiety that is about physical safety, that is about there's a potential of you getting hurt? And I was like, how do you push aside all our fears about pedophiles and all that stuff? Because you know it's highly unlikely, but it's still real. How do you push it aside to let your children take risks so that they can build their own resilience? And he said, if you are someone who worries about the cost of those things, the potential physical danger, you need to start thinking about the cost of not doing it. Mm-hmm. You need to start to get the picture in your head of the person who isn't allowed to live a life, who is held too tightly, who is living in your basement when they're 30. You know, start to build up those questions if you need to start to let go of those other fears. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. My awareness now, one of the problems with starting to learn this stuff and understanding it is you get kind of hyper aware of how you're interacting, and that leads to more problems. I'll give you a quick example that fits with the example that you just gave. I had an electrician at our house, like 15 or 20 years ago. Like it was a long time ago, and he was working on something. And just as I'm conversing with him, he tells me the leading cause of house fires is when extension cords get trapped under bedposts, and then people lay in their bed, and over the course of a year or two, they wind down this extension cord and the house catches on fire. Once a week, every Sunday night, I go through my whole house and make sure there's no extension cords trapped under anything heavy now. And that's my OCD, right? That's my internal, I can't stop doing that. Well,
I mean, that we've got that going on in every bedroom. All right. This is the biggest takeaway from this podcast. Everyone go and check now.
Okay. So we've just moved to a new place here in Denver, and my teenage boys are sharing a room in this place, and they've moved in and they've moved all their furniture in. And on Sunday night, while my old teenage son is laying in bed, I walked through and I checked to see if they set up all the cords right, because I can't not do that. That's my thing. That's my fear of them getting on the bus, right? Well, when I walked out of the room, I heard him sigh, and I know, you know what I just did? I just told him he's not smart enough to not put an electrical cord under his bedpost. What a terrible message I just delivered to my 17-year-old son. And, you know, I'm wearing that now. I'm still thinking about it 3 days later. God, what a mistake that was. So yeah, the cost of behaving the way we instinctually want to behave, it's huge. We have to push the boundaries. We have to be the generation that makes the change. I think it's important. This is a dynamic that's changed from when I was a kid, and even my adult relationship with my parents now. I think it's really important for us to learn from our kids. Our kids learn in different ways than we learn. You and I read textbooks. We went to the library. We got the encyclopedia. Our kids, some of that thumb time that worries us so much, they're actually learning good stuff. They're learning from the internet. And while we all have to be cautious of the validity of what you learn on the internet, the fact is there's a lot of truth there, and they are educating themselves on subjects where they have a high level of interest. And so when my kids bring something to me that they've learned, whether it be from the internet or otherwise, my go-to, based on the way I was parented, the thing that was handed down to me was to second guess it, to question it, to ask for their sources, to ask if they verified their source. How do you know? How do you really know that to be true? And one of the things that I'm trying to do now to be a better parent is to engage in conversation with curiosity, ask them more questions about the thing that they're trying to teach me, but not in a condescending, verify your sources kind of way. Ask him to elaborate, ask him to teach me more. I love my father and I have a good relationship with my father. I don't think he's ever admitted to learning a single thing from me in our entire 53-year relationship. He's the father, I'm the son, the teaching goes one way. I try really hard to learn something from my kids every day. Even if it's minor and unimportant, I just want for them to tell me something about their day and for me to have follow-up questions that are not judgmental, they're curious instead. And I think I see what that does for their self-esteem when instead of me second guessing them, I'm actually building my own knowledge base based on things coming out of their mouths. That's huge. That is my daughter's my oldest, she's a young adult. She's a school teacher in Minneapolis. And she tells me what she thinks, what she's seeing live and in person about the really huge problem we're having in the public education system here in the United States. She's telling me what she thinks her causes are. And instead of me saying, oh, yeah, well, I read in the Wall Street Journal, blah, 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 I'm absorbing it and I'm learning. And our relationship has grown immensely because of my curiosity about the things she has to teach me. So I think that's another huge component here.
Yeah, and I think what I like about that as well is that there's a guy in the States who said he started the thing called the daddying movement. He's called Alan Sheldon, and I spoke to him ages ago, and he was an educator. He'd been a high school principal. And no, he was an elementary school principal. And he was like, the one word that was banned in my school. And he was like, I got all the kids together. And I was like, the principal's going to say which word is banned. And they were all really excited because they're like, it's going to be this naughty word. Right. And the word that was banned was grown up. And he just he didn't like this idea that there was a point where you were finished growing up and there was a point where education came to an end. And I think that's what you're talking about there really does for kids. It's like, I'm still learning, I'm still growing, you can teach me. You actually don't need this anxiety about your school and about having to know everything by the time you leave it, because you won't. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to be a finished article ever. Education goes on and on and on and on. And we get to show them that as curious parents who are learning from them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I learned this lesson from the peer support groups that we run. My wife and I have all this experience in recovery and relationship recovery. More importantly, I went and got a degree and that was all because of insecurity, Alex. I went and got a degree because I had imposter syndrome for the work that I was doing, right? I learned a few tidbits in college in my graduate studies, right? There's some things I took from that were valuable, but 90% of what I use on a daily basis, 90% of the value that I can provide to our audience or the people that are in our groups comes from stuff I've learned from the groups. I can't tell you how many times I hear something and I turn to my wife and say, wow, did you know that? Do you feel that way? I learned so much from interacting with people. So I think whenever we can create an environment where people get a sense of belonging, and the sense of belonging comes from being both the teacher and the student at the same time. If you can create an environment where we get that sense of belonging because the knowledge flow is going both ways, I mean, that has incredible impact on our self-esteem, our self-confidence, and the way that we express ourselves in the world. And so I learned that from this work that we do, and then translated it to my family, and by gosh, it works there too. It's incredible.
Thank you so much, mate. Is there anything that you're like, oh, I wish we'd have touched on that?
I just think that vulnerability is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what I mean by that is it's really scary to tiptoe into areas of expressiveness where men have not traditionally gone, where all of our conditioning tells us to be afraid. But when we do, it almost always, not always, I don't want to lie, I don't want to oversell it, but it almost always is very rewarding. I'll give you an example. When before my wife and I did what we do now for a living, we ran a bakery for 15 years, a whole grain bread bakery. And I'll never forget when we were transitioning out of that and I was going to start writing, customers across the counter that were buying bread from me said, oh, I see that you're closing the shop. What are you going to do next? And I just blurted out, I'm going to be a writer. And I was so embarrassed to say those words out loud. Like, who's actually a writer? Like, what do I think I'm Stephen King over here? And I said it out loud, and I braced myself for what their response was going to be. And it was a couple, and they said, oh, that's cool. Wow, that's way different than this. That sounds really interesting. And then they went about their day, they bought their bread, and they moved on. They didn't give me another single thought, but they also didn't cut me down at the knees, which is what I'd been conditioned to expect. And so whenever we find a way, this is the key to this emotional safety, emotional masculinity, finding a way to be vulnerable and see what reaction you get. I'd say somewhere in the vicinity of 90% of the time, that's going to be a rewarding experience. And the 10% when it's not, that helps you build resilience. So expressing vulnerability, being curious out there in the world, I just think it's so important.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. If you want to hear more from Matt, you can check out the Untoxicated podcast, which he co-hosts with his wife Sherry. It's on Spotify, Apple, and all the usual places. Or you can find it via their website at un-toxicated.com. Please follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Be a Happier Parent, and I will see you all soon.